I'm Ben Cammarano from Microsoft Studios, and I represent 343 as their publishing art director.
And I'm Edwin van Gessel, and I'm an art director at Vanguard Games.
When you think about a Halo title, there's 4 visual principles that we like to follow. The first is that we put a high premium on heroic vistas. It's important for customers and fans to feel like they're in this epic, wide, expansive universe. The second is visceral action. Again, a Halo title, we expect large battles, lots of action, movement, combat. It's really important that we feel integrated within the story and the experience. So anything around movement is very important. The third is actually the iconic imagery. Obviously, it's important that we want to make sure that all the assets and all the characters look and feel just like what you see, what you've read or experienced within the stories and in the games. Spartans look like Spartans. Elites feel and move like elites. So it's important that the iconic imagery of the characters, of the interface, of the different cultures and civilizations look and feel appropriate. And then lastly, what's a visual distinction of a Halo title is the vibrant, colorful palettes. Okay, very intense, cool colors. The idea is that when you look at UNSC, it feels it's a type of vibrant, almost earthy tones, very much a modular design, and greens and browns, and then you look at Covenants and you see purples and blues and reds. So those are the 4 pillars that we utilize. So it's important that when whatever studio we're working with, we establish those pillars. We then look for creative opportunities that each developer or each studio can add value to. So in case of working with Vanguard, when we talked about heroic vistas, based on the creative visual direction that Edwin wanted to follow, we set principles about what was it that was going to make each vista and landscape heroic, which he'll be able to talk about in a little bit. So it's very important that when we work with a partner, that we establish a framework of principles and sensibilities that we feel makes a Halo game or experience, but yet at the same time allow enough creativity that each developer can feel that they're adding their own unique value and experience to the product.
Well, obviously, our departure point was something completely different than any Halo title up until now. I think the one that's closest to at least our camera point is Halo Wars, which was the successful strategy game in the Halo universe. We targeted different platforms, obviously. The Microsoft hardware needed a different approach, both in visual language and in game design, which Martin will later tell you something about. But because of those limitations or opportunities as well, we need to look at the Halo franchise and those visual pillars from a different point of view. So, for instance, if you talk about verticality and vistas, which is one of the visual pillars, then immediately comes to mind the grand skyboxes that Halo is quite famous for. The large distances that you can see, the space view with the iconic ring. We needed some way to translate that into a top-down perspective game.
I think actually one of the things that I know attracted me to when we first started working with Vanguard was the fact that on their previous titles, like Greed Corp and Gatling Gears, the fact that how they treated the action and movement of those titles, we could see it, myself and others at 343 could really see that Vanguard had kind of that secret sauce that we knew how they were going to treat this type of gameplay mode. So when I got a chance to finally meet with Edwin and his team that first time and got a little bit of a behind the scenes on how Vanguard treated movement and activity on their previous titles, that was one of the things that sold me right away, that Vanguard was the right partner to work with, especially on the visual front. They've done such a hell of a job on those two titles, and you can see it now in Spartan Assault. I think this is a category that's a pillar that doesn't get as much credit because it is moving. You have to experience it within game. You can't just throw up a piece of concept artwork and say, hey, there's this fantastic battle going on. You actually have to pull it off. And while it doesn't have the same horsepower or same type of, what's the word I'm looking for? The same type of glamour that working on a console has, the fact that they could make it feel on a tablet like I was still immersed, like they did on their previous titles, it was great. I knew right away, for me, that was one of the key factors.
Right, the start point was actually Ben's high-level briefing that you just heard. And from there on, we assembled a team of graphic artists, and we started brainstorming together about what would fit those high-level pillars. Like Ben described, the colorful palette is important. One of the factors was also visually that at some level you would want to be there, even though there's a war going on and raging and all sorts of enemy activity. The key is that you have to make the environment interesting and at some level, you want to be there. And that's something that we already included a lot in the graphical design phases of previous titles, which is, I think, one of the reasons that we got noticed. Yeah. And that's very Halo-like already. Sometimes you just want to stand somewhere for 10 minutes and just look at the awesome environment instead of thinking of, okay, I need to kill that many enemies. So with that still in mind, we started developing ideas for worlds, and obviously Ben was the one that my team and myself ultimately had to respond to and convey our ideas to and test it. So with those high-level ideas, I think we got up around six possible worlds to explore. And so we started talking about those worlds, what would be the benefits, maybe some dangers. I remember a conversation about an ancient alien civilization, long gone, not Forerunner, but some other race, which didn't make it to production phase because we both agreed that it would be kind of hard to implement to a degree that that people get the idea from a top-down perspective as well.
Yeah, I think actually that's another good point is part of that phase that I think in the beginning that Edwin and his team did really well is, and it's also part of my job, is to make sure that I'm getting them the information they need, especially on how to treat the franchise and act as that conduit between our franchise teams and the art teams that Edwin was leading here. So it's very important as part of that initial process to build a visual target. Being able to communicate out to everybody, what do you want the game to look like? Because I don't think, again, what's given a lot of credit is behind the scenes, the amount of people and decision-making that goes on. I mean, you are still running a business and people want to know what they're paying for. So it was very important, again, why Vanguard was such a great partner is immediately knowing that they were going to have to communicate visually what they wanted to do first. Once everybody was on board, then the next stages of moving into maybe initial prototyping phase and then into production went much smoother.
Obviously, our previous titles have been from a top-down perspective, except the horse game. Scrap that out. Scrap that out.
What is this horse game? What is this horse game?
No comment. Well, it was actually quite a nice title, but so we already had experience in what makes a good top-down perspective, and that's what I previously talked about as well. Be not just giving shape to a world seen from the top-down perspective, but all the little things around it. You know, seeing birds in front of your camera, the parallax workings of high objects versus a lower game plane. That's all stuff that we had experience in and also applied to this Halo franchise. So I would say those kinds of decisions and things that you learned in the past are typically Vanguard.
So the animatics were done by the Sequence Group, which is in Vancouver. We used them on Halo Anniversary, then on Halo 4, and then here we are on Spartan Assault. So again, another great partner for us at 343 that we've utilized. The beauty of being able to work with that partner is that, and with Vanguard, is that a principle we have at 343 Industries is to allow our publishing partners, our developers that we work with, as much creative input as possible. So Edwin and Martin and their creative teams were given as much input as we possibly could with our franchise teams and with the Sequence Group on creating that story that forms the connective tissue between the different levels. The number one thing is vistas. I mean, you cannot, as we've been saying, I think on Halo, the epic grandeur scale that we want this IP to be, that's the first thing you'll notice. Edwin had touched on it earlier. You go into these worlds, you want to look around. You feel a part of it. It's unique. There's always that, I think, that wonderment that any fan of science fiction has about, what's around the corner, or what does that planet off in the distance mean? I want to go there, or that ring, or anything like that. I think the heroic vistas are the number one thing that people will see. I'd probably say number two if you see Master Chief. Forget it. Everybody knows Master Chief. But when you look at a game, it's probably the vistas that we want people to be drawn into first, drawn into that world, and then be able to tell our story.
As Ben already described, the iconic imagery is also very important, because if you start messing around with a color scheme that doesn't feel like Halo. For instance, we had a small test where we made the entire interface orange to try and to hook that into the mini-series Forward Unto Dawn of Halo, which also features an orange display. So when we started fiddling around with that, we immediately noticed, no, this doesn't feel like Halo anymore. We cannot do this. So for me, iconic imagery is quite important as well. Fans expect a certain degree of sleekness, of intensity, of just plain a color scheme, being very bright blue elements. Otherwise, it just won't feel Halo. I feel that you can get away with any type of environment that you can think of. As a matter of fact, Halo has in the past visited multiple areas where there are buildings, obviously set in the future, but human colonies, alien worlds, uninhabited planets, space itself. But if you would take away those iconic images, then the environment doesn't touch the Halo experience anymore. So for me, I think one of the most important things is the iconic imagery of Halo. My team and in collaboration with Ben, we've just I feel we've just nailed the Halo feel. And if you look on websites and read reviews, people notice that they say we have done right to the franchise, and people can relate to it. Hardcore Halo fans they understand the worlds, they feel at home. And I think that's probably our greatest achievement in this project.